guest for the evening. Please welcome Dion Parsons. Dion, how are you?
Hey Mel, I am great. I am great. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
I'm just delighted to have you on the show. You know, one of the things that I've really been working hard on is bringing in jazz artists that represent different subgenres of jazz. And I had on not long ago a trombonist who does jazz hip hop. I've had on people who do jazz country, and now we're going to have something really interesting for everybody, jazz Ribian.
Jazz Ribian, correct,
Yeah,
correct.
so I'm really excited to bring this new jazz form, to the center stage, and you're the person who's created it and is giving it life. So, again, I'm so excited to have you. I want to welcome you one more time. And we always start the show by letting our guests or everybody who's looking in, either watching the show live, streaming video, or listening on their radios or on their cell phones, for you to tell everybody what's up. What's cooking, what are you doing? So if anybody wants to come hear your music and come see your performances, they get a heads up right at the start. So why don't you share what you're doing these days?
Well, thanks again, Mel. Well, as you mentioned, Jazz Ribian. That's mainly what's up. Jazz Ribian is a genre of music that we created, and that's where jazz meets the Caribbean. And being from the Virgin Islands, I grew up with a number of interesting rhythms from the Caribbean: calypso, soca, reggae, mento, zouk. All of these rhythms exist on different islands throughout the Caribbean, and throughout the year when you have carnival time and you visit the different islands, or bands from the other islands visit you, you get exposed to all of these wonderful rhythms. And after leaving the Virgin Islands and going to the United States, attending college and moving to New York to be a professional musician and studying specifically jazz, I came up with this bright idea, talking with my good friend Ron Blake, who was my roommate at the time. And I mentioned to Ron, I said, we're here in New York and we have such a rich culture from the Virgin Islands, and we would listen to calypso music and Miles Davis and soca music and you know John Coltrane and reggae music, Bob Marley, and then we'll turn around and listen to Monty Alexander, and we after trying to figure out how to get started with this, we decided to create a platform where we could express our Caribbean cultural heritage music in a jazz format. Hence the creation of the 21st Century Band, which is the band that I lead, and it's a band that presents music in a Caribbean platform with a jazz presentation, format.
Where
And
are you gonna? Is your band gonna be performing somewhere soon?
we just finished up a nice month-long run in June, starting in the Virgin Islands through Lincoln Center and other gigs in New York City. And then I did some stuff with John Faddis in July, and I'm actually now in Europe finishing up a family visit with my wife and my son, visiting her family and heading back to the States tomorrow, where I go back to St. Thomas, where I'm the chair of the Communication and Performing Arts Department at the University of the Virgin Islands. So I'm getting ready to go back and set that up. And then I'll be back on tour in October. I have some gigs in St. Thomas with a wonderful Cuban pianist by the name of Elio Villafranca, who I've worked with for a number of years. And I have some stuff in Uruguay with him and some other projects of my own. But mainly, we're focusing on the Jazz Ribian presentation to get that going. And additionally to the performance side, Nicole and I created a foundation called United Jazz Foundation, established in New York, but we presented in the Virgin Islands, and we do a number of after-school programs in partnership with the Department of Education and the University of the Virgin Islands. So we're getting ready to implement those programs at the end of September and get all the kids rallied up for the year and get them situated with the youth ensembles and artists in residence, where we bring in a number of artists to mentor the kids as well. And we have early learning program for the little top ones in partnership with Jazz at Lincoln Center. So we have a number of projects happening. So
You know, right now
That's what's up.
you're going to hit the ground running as soon as you get back here.
As soon
You
as
know,
I get off the plane, I'm hitting the ground running. So
yeah.
just had a little 2 week hiatus with the family, and we kind of refreshed. Oh, the other thing is that United Jazz Foundation this year, 2020, 23, we started last summer, a collaborative partnership with the Department of Tourism, um, under the guidance of the governor of the Virgin Islands, to create a music festival. So we created a Caribbean music festival on St. Croix, United States Virgin Islands. And we had 3 concerts, one in February where we featured Diane Reeves and
Oh wow.
Calvin Johnson and Native
Oh
Sons out of New Orleans. We
yeah.
had another one in March where we had the wonderful and talented, amazing Chucho Valdez with special guests Terrence Blanchard, Rutgers
Oh wow.
alumni, and Joe Lovano. And and then the last concert we did in May, Memorial Weekend, we created a really unique orchestra, big band orchestra, 22 people. And these are all members of the 21st Century Band and young men and women that had came to our youth program over the years and graduated through college and in the States, doing wonderful things. So we put together a 22-piece big band, and we invited my dear friend John Faddis to be the musical director and lead the band. And we had special guest vocalist Renee Marie singing
Hmm.
with us, and we serenaded the folks in St. Croix. And again, we played a variety of music, some Caribbean stuff, some classic jazz, and yeah. So that's kind of what I've been up to. I'm trying to bring the Caribbean to the forefront of jazz, with our special unique sound called Jazz Caribbean.
Well, we're going to get into that in more detail. I know that right now you're in the Netherlands and you'll be leaving tomorrow, and Europe has really taken young people now, particularly in the UK. I'm very familiar with that. Young people have now really embraced jazz. It's amazing. And
Mhm.
there's so many young jazz virtuosos, both vocalists, musicians, bands that are using jazz. Of course, they may do some jazz crossover, jazz hip hop, jazz metal, but the fact is that they really are loving jazz. And it's so nice to see that revival again and the things that you're doing, bringing a new form of jazz to the forefront. It's not new; it's been there. But
Right, right,
what's
right.
new is how you're putting it together and
Mhm.
and giving it life. And I think a lot of the music that you are creating, young people are going to really embrace. I think they're tired of urban music. That's all they hear on the radio, and that's why they stream, and that's why they're looking for different sounds. So I'm hoping for a big jazz revival in the next few years. That's what I'm hoping for. So
I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. And a good friend of mine told me years ago that the Caribbean is one of the few untouched arenas of music and culture in the mainstream. And I'm really happy to be part of this renaissance of musicians coming out of the Caribbean. There's a number of us doing wonderful things. I'm really so happy to see that there's a lot of creativity coming out of the Caribbean.
yes, yes. So we're going to spend some more time. We're going to listen to some of your at least three of your tracks tonight, and you
Okay.
can give everybody the backstory on how you created them and what musicians were playing on some of the music that we're going to hear tonight. But let's start off by giving people some background. They've now heard all the things you're doing with your band, your own solo career, your foundation. You're a teacher, an educator. We want to know how you got there. So, when did you first embrace music? Was it music in your home, or was it through the church, or how did you come to music in the first place?
Well, that's a great question, and I've been asked that question a lot. I didn't grow up in a musical household, but I grew up in a music and loving household. My mother loved music, and my sisters. I grew up with all women. I have 5 sisters.
Oh, wow.
A single mom, and I grew up with two sisters, and would visit my older sisters during the summer. They lived on a different island, but there was always music around in the Virgin Islands during the late '60s, early '70s. there was a lot of live bands. Every event had a band performing, and my father loved music. He wasn't in the house, but I would spend a lot of time with him, and he would take me around from one venue to the next, and I would just sit there, and I just fell in love with it. It was something that was innate to me, and I knew everybody in the family knew that I wanted to be a musician, and my first instrument was a trombone. Elementary school, I remember the first day of school when we had to had an opportunity to pick our instruments. My mother was there, and she made sure she told the band director, whatever you do, don't let him play drums. I don't want drums in the household at all. Excuse me. And my trombone teacher at the time, Dr. Leroy Trotman, he was a trombone player. And I know he saw my my yearning, my interest in the music, and he embraced me and became my first mentor. And through over the years, junior high school, we found a beat up old set of drums under the stage in the auditorium, and he took them to his house on the weekends. I would go and tinker with them and fix them up, and eventually I started playing on the drums and figuring stuff out, listening to the radio. Back then we had those little cassette tapes, the
It's,
little
it,
walk.
sou- it sounds like that song. I don't want to work. I want to bang on the drums all day.
Hey, I was that kid, man. I really was that kid, and it paid off. In ninth grade, that summer between ninth grade and 10th grade, I got a scholarship to go to Interlochen, and I went there as a percussionist, classical percussionist, and that was my first time studying any type of percussion stuff, switching from the trombone, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I knew at that moment what I wanted to do. And then later on in high school, my senior year, I was awarded the Virgin Islands recipient, after auditioning to become a member of the McDonald's All-American High School Band
I remember that. Yeah.
time. And that was a big thing back then. A lot of great musicians came out from McDonald's All-American High School Band. And that going to Interlochen and McDonald's band did it for me. And during that time, I was fortunate to be able to witness a concert by the Rutgers University jazz professors. And these guys, these wonderful musicians, came to the Virgin Islands. They were invited there by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Lawrence McClellan, who at the time was instrumental. Him and his wife at the time was instrumental in creating the music program at the University of the Virgin Islands, which I now run. you know, Fast forward 40 years.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so I ended up meeting these wonderful musicians from Rutgers University, and it was Ted Dunbar on guitar, Frank Foster and tenor saxophone, Kenny Barron, who I ended up studying with at Rutgers, Larry Ridley. Kenny Barron was on piano, Larry Ridley on bass, and amazing Philly Joe Jones on drums.
Yeah.
And my first time hearing traditional straight ahead jazz, I never really heard it before, and it just blew my mind. I had no idea what these gentlemen were doing, but I understood it. I was like, wow, this is amazing. He's doing this and he's doing that, and it was just a wealth of sound information that just
Yeah.
captured me, and I followed that sound to Rutgers. That's how I ended up at Rutgers.
It's funny your story about you to play the trombone primarily because your mother wouldn't let you play the drums. When I had Jeff Bradshaw on, who Jeff, and Jeff
Mhm.
said that he wanted to play the guitar or play the drums, but every time he went to band and he picked up an instrument, the band director would say, "It's already taken. It's already taken." And he
Right,
finally
right.
said, "Well," finally said, "What's left?" And he said, "The trombone." He said, "I'll take it." And that's how he became a trombone player.
Yeah, yeah. Everybody had that story, but
Yeah.
coming from the islands, the one thing I must say, we had a very, very strong public school music program, from elementary school all the way up, concert band, marching band later on in high school, but concert band, I was very instrumental in forming my high school jazz ensemble. And our teachers at the time was very encouraging, but they were good disciplinarians. I mean, they were the type of teachers that they would lock the band room door until they completed their task. And band was always the last period of the day. So sometimes we would go into band at 2:30 in the afternoon and leave at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
and none of the parents complained. It was so
Yeah.
much support. It was a lot of support. We didn't have private lessons. We didn't have the theory courses and those type of things that you really need to be
Well,
proficient.
back
And
then in high school, who were some of your musical influences in jazz? Who were they?
I really in high school I really didn't have any because I didn't know. I really didn't know.
Really?
Jazz
Okay.
was not played regularly. Um, uh, on the radio, and
Right.
my uncle Alan Canton, he had a really nice jazz collection, and every once in a while he would sit down and put on some recordings. And Mango Santa Maria, he loved Latin
Oh,
jazz,
yeah.
and Tito Puente and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then there was a music store called Parrotfish, and I can't remember the guy's name that owned the store. It was on Back Street. We had Main Street and Back Street, and I used to walk by there and stop in there after school. And the gentleman befriended me, and he would play songs for me and let me borrow cassette tapes to go with, and Spyro Gyro and Yellow Jackets and those type of groups that Chuck Mangione, that those were the artists that was being considered jazz musicians at that time. And I remember when Herbie Hancock came out with that pop record Rocket with the
Yeah.
DJ
Yeah.
and everybody was into it. It was playing in all the discos, and I was like, yeah, Herbie Hancock. And one of my music teachers sat me down and was like, yeah, that's not the Herbie Hancock that's the popular Herbie Hancock. You got to go back to Miles Davis. And that's when I started to I was about a senior in high school when I really started to make those connections. Herbie Hancock, Tony Williams, Miles Davis. But I didn't have the resources. Like now, you have a cell phone, you have Google, you could just Google somebody. And the good thing about YouTube is if you pull up somebody's name, they list all of these connections that you could just follow along. So I really was very I really didn't know much when I left home. I went to college. I was just hungry. That's all I can say. I was really hungry for information. I was really happy to be at Rutgers and be around great talent. All my peers, everybody could play. I was like the only one that couldn't play, and I was trying. I was honestly, I was I ended up moving it. I literally moved into my practice room my first semester.
Let me back you up. How did you get to Rutgers?
How you mean? How I got the Rutgers?
I mean, why? Was it because the people from Rutgers came down and played for
Oh
you?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah. Once I heard the Rutgers University jazz professors, I think in 11th grade at that time. 10th grade, 10th grade, I was in 10th grade, and it just stuck with me. And Dr. McClellan became a mentor also, and he would talk to me. He's like, "Hey man, this is where these guys are, but you have to know this information." He was the one that introduced me to the real Herbie Hancock, and not that Rocket wasn't real, but him
Like,
performing with Miles, and then the Headhunters, and all of the great things he accomplished. And Dr. McClellan introduced me to Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, that type of stuff. So we would go by his house, and there was another guy, another professor at the university by the name of Ron Fain from Detroit. And he would have listening, sessions at his house. So we would, myself and about 5 or 6 other musicians that went to high school with me would go to these gentlemen's homes on a regular and just listen and try to figure stuff out. So yeah, so I followed these guys to Rutgers, and 1985 I got accepted to Rutgers and started my degree there, and I got to Rutgers and didn't know much. I never took a drum lesson, so I showed up like, "Hey, I'm
wow.
a drummer," and they was like,
Wow.
"No, you're not."
Well, could you read music when you got there? Or
Could
was
read
that something?
music. That's the one thing. Growing up playing trombone, I was very literate. I could read music. I understood theory. I understood melodic structures, scales. So I actually studied classical percussion with William Morsh, and I studied jazz drums with Keith Copeland.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, so the reading part is what really got me in the door because I was proficient enough to pass the theory test and those type of things, and the faculty decided to take a chance and work with me, and it worked out. I put in the time. Like I said, I just moved into my practice room, literally slept there every day, and would practice all day and all night.
Were you doing classical jazz or classical music?
I was doing classical music and jazz studies. So I was one of those students that, because I was a music education major, I had to do all the classical stuff as well. So I was doing xylophone, marimba, classical snare drum, but then I was also taking the jazz drum set stuff where I learned the different grooves, bossa nova, medium swing, up tempo swing, funk, samba, those type of things.
And so you were able to use a lot of your Caribbean influences at that point. Were you
Well,
using?
when I first got to Rutgers, I really didn't even focus on the Caribbean stuff. I just jumped into the lessons that I was being presented, and I did that like really, really consistently for 3 years. And then I kind of came up for air, and a friend of mine one day mentioned to me like, "Hey, man, whatever you do, don't lose your Caribbean roots because that's something that's special." He's like, "Find a way to incorporate that." And it stuck with me. It stuck with me. And once I moved to New York and started working with all of the wonderful musicians I work with, but mainly Donald Harrison. Donald Harrison, I had a great relationship with him and worked with him for a number of years. And we would go back and forth to New Orleans, and I learned the Mardi Gras second line, and there was a good connection to the Virgin Islands. A lot of similar rhythms and
Sure.
similar
Yes. Yeah.
traditions with carnival and everything. And then Donald Harrison kind of rekindled, that notion of like, hey, you can incorporate your Caribbean heritage into what you're doing. And then I had a really wonderful opportunity to meet and play with Monty Alexander for a number of years as well. And I got to, be part of Monty's creative world where he would take a jazz song and take it through, reggae, one drop groove, and then the steppers and the mentor bring it back to jazz. And the same song would go through all of these rhythmic, grooves. And it was amazing how we did it. And it
But
was
your
never
first,
one or twice. And that really connected the dots for me.
but your first forays was classical music and straight ahead jazz. That's when you
Yes.
first. And
Yes.
why don't you define for some of my listeners what is straight ahead jazz?
Well, what people call straight ahead. I mean, there's a lot of folks out there with a problem with the word jazz, but just for this conversation, straight ahead jazz is the traditional, the traditional jazz that we grew up with. The Louis Armstrong and the big band era, Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Satin Doll, Take the A Train. That's the traditional repertoire of jazz that most I'm saying most because these days a lot of the younger jazz musicians don't even pay attention to that. They just want to do their own thing. But when I came up, there's a standard repertoire that we called it. Autumn Leaves, A Train, Cherokee, Donnelly, traditional songs that the masters played that they made popular, that we learned that when we would go from jam session to jam session or even to somebody's gig to support, and they invited us to play, there was a repertoire, standard repertoire that you could call from, and everybody should know it. And we would get on stage and have jam sessions. So that's the traditional jazz. So I came to New York doing a lot of that.
That, uh, what's really interesting to me is the difference between when you were coming up and performing jazz, you still had the homage to people like Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington and Count Basie, and it's hard for me to imagine how young people can embrace and develop a jazz career and not even know who those guys were. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know how you do that.
Yeah. It's hey, I mean, things get saturated along the way. Some institutions choose not to focus on the traditional, but more on the contemporary and the modern, and they kind of cater to, what people want to learn, I'm of the school that you learn the rules to break the rules. Once you understand how things work, then you can go ahead and embellish them. If you don't understand how something works, then it's really difficult to have a foundation off of it. I mean, there's some guys out there doing wonderful things that don't know standards,
Yeah.
and they're fine with it. So it's that's what I'm saying. The word jazz means a lot to a lot of different folks. So it's really interesting. But I must say, when I first came to New York, there was a gentleman by the name of Ray Anderson, a trombone player. Was my first gig that brought me to New York while I was still in college. And Ray was very, he was a great mentor. He was very nurturing in the fact that Ray had a very eclectic band and he played a lot of avant-garde music, but he also paid homage to a lot of the traditional masters. He played rhythm and blues. He allowed me to present my Caribbean rhythms and a lot of the songs that we would sit down and talk about, creative ideas for music. And I think coming to New York, playing with Ray with that open mentality, but also having a foundation in the blues and rhythm and blues specifically, um, allowed me to understand that it's okay to be creative, but also have a sense of foundation. And shortly after I stopped working with Ray, I started working with John Faddish, who's very much of a traditionalist. And so it was really interesting to each leader has a different concept of their music, and it all evolves from a certain foundation musically. So that's why I'm saying for the young folks is if you want to be a professional touring musician on the scene, playing jazz, it's really important to have a good solid foundation of the music.
You're so right. One of the people I've been trying to get on my show is John Batiste, and
Okay.
and and he's classically trained.
Hmm.
He was a classically trained pianist and musician, and that's the foundation for all the interesting stuff he's done with jazz and R&B. And
Hmm.
Bruno Mars is another one. These guys sample that music because they understand why it's so important to
Yeah.
keep the tradition, and because you can't replace it. You can change it, but you can't replace it. And they understand replacement, that it's really important.
Hmm.
And that's what I think is really critical, that young people, they really need more of a sense of history within music. And it doesn't mean you can't be creative. Obviously, from straight ahead jazz, you got progressive jazz, smooth jazz, which some people claim isn't jazz. but
Hmm.
I had on Curtis Harmon and James Lloyd from Pieces of a Dream, and they studied with Grover Washington, who studied with Miles Davis, and you know
Hmm.
that lineage is so critical
It is.
to to the music. So I don't understand how anybody could just jump into jazz and not connect. But that's
Yeah,
just me.
yeah, and when I was coming up, also when I first got to New York, the school of apprenticeship still existed.
Right.
Meaning, like, someone like if Art Blakey was still alive. The jazz messenger. So many wonderful musicians came through Art Blakey as a jazz messenger, and went on to have some a wonderful careers. Almost everybody that came through Art Blakey became leaders in their own right with wonderful bands. Betty Carter. I had the privilege of working with Betty Carter, and she was known for molding really great rhythm sections, piano players, bass players, and drummers. Everybody that came through Betty Carter, successful career, and so many other folks. Dion Reeves is doing the same thing now. She keep, there were bands in place that you can work with an artist for 6-7 years and learn a craft and develop yourself, and then went on to the next band. A lot of that apprenticeship does not exist anymore. You basically
Exactly.
come out there and you graduated from a school and you played your butt off and you got all A's, and it's like, hey, this is my man, this is my student, hire him. And that's kind of what's happening. And nobody wants to do jam sessions anymore because
Yeah.
they're like, hey, why should I leave my house and not get paid? If I'm going to come out and sing my horn, I want to get paid. When I came to New York, man, Mark Harry and it lived on the fourth floor. Ron Blake and I was roommates. Roy Hargrove just came to town. We would have sessions. We'd be running back and forth from each other's apartment and having sessions. I mean, we had the co-op board of our apartment trying to evict us, and all we wanted to do was play. I mean, we would go from apartment to apartment day and night. We would hang out in the village, 4 o'clock, everything was shut down. We go to somebody's apartment and set up and just start jamming. And we did that for 10 years coming to New York. And that's what we did, because we wanted to, show the what one we wanted to play. And we wanted to create stuff with our peers, the young lions, so to speak.
Yeah.
But the elders was watching us also and say, hey, okay, young talent, what do you have? What do you have?
Show me what you got. Yeah.
Exactly. It wasn't like,
Yeah.
hey, I studied with this guy at this school, so hire me. That didn't exist.
Exactly.
Cats didn't cosign you unless you came out and you proved to them. I was playing organ joints in Harlem for many nights with Big Bill Saxon. I did that for 8 years. We would start at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and finish at 4 in the morning, nonstop. And that was the scene, So a lot of that have changed. So a lot of these, these young musicians don't know what existed, and that's part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to play one of your songs. I want to start getting into some of your music. And,
Okay.
I have 3 of them here. I don't know which one you want me to play first. I have St. Thomas, I have Calypso Bayou, and I have Air on a G String. Which one should we play first?
Let's start off with St. Thomas. I'm from
Okay.
St. Thomas. That's I wrote this song because almost every gig I would get on, people say, "Oh, our drummer's from St. Thomas. Let's play St. Thomas." And it never sounded the way St. Thomas should sound to me. So I was talking to Jeff Watts one day, and I was saying to Jeff, I said, man, I'm tired of playing St. Thomas. It doesn't sound right when I get on these gigs. He said, well, write an arrangement the way you want it to sound like, and you want it to be played. And cattle, if you write it out, cats will be able to do it. So I wrote this arrangement.
Yep, it's always, if you build it, they will come.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. When did you write this, and when did you put it out?
This came out in this St. Thomas recording came out in 2017, which was in time for the emancipation of the Virgin Islands, when the U.S. bought the Virgin Islands from Denmark, and I did it for the emancipation. So I did this arrangement partly to honor Sonny Rollins as well, whose family's from the Virgin Islands, and it took me a minute to come up with this arrangement. I was working on it for a couple of years, but once I came up with it, we went in the studio the year before, recorded it, and put the album out in 2017.
Great. Well, let's hear it. I want everybody to hear this. We have about 37,000 people tuned in already, so I think you'll build a whole bunch of new fans.
Great, thanks. You're muted, Mel. You're still muted.
I apologize. I'm unmuted now.
Yes, yes.
So, who was playing trumpet?
So that's my good dear friend. That's the one and only Rashawn Ross.
Okay.
Native Virgin Islander, and he's currently now with Dave Matthews Band for like the past 20 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I've known Rashawn since he was a kid growing up in St. Thomas. Wonderful, talented, amazing musician. Yeah.
Yeah. And who was playing on the steel drum? Who was that?
So the steel pan player is a young man from St. John, Virgin Islands, and his name is Victor Provost. He grew up in St. John, resides now in Maryland, and he's
Oh,
professor at George Mason University. So, the band, as you can tell, comprised of all Virgin Islanders. The saxophone player is my dear friend, childhood friend, Ron Blake. And Ron and I, he moved to New York about 4 years after me and became roommates. But he's now professor at Juilliard um,
okay.
Conservatory in New York City for many years. And he's also the Barry sax and flute player at Saturday Night Live for, I think, like 18 years.
Oh, terrific.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, so we all ended up in New York. The bass player is Ruben Rogers, a monster bass player. I known him since he was in elementary school. We all ended up in New York, and we talking about how can we make our contribution to this scene, and hence came up with this band. The piano player is my dear friend Carlton Holmes, who's originally from New Mexico. He now resides on the beautiful island of St. Thomas, and he's our piano and theory instructor at the University of the Virgin Islands. So we were able to recruit him to come to the Virgin Islands to get a taste of our culture. He's been playing in the band for many years, over 20 years. And of course, our percussion player, a gentleman from Senegal. And when we started the song, you heard the talking drum.
Yep.
And that's the influence of our diaspora, going all the way going back to Africa. So I had a percussion player in the band, a conga player. And right when we did the first recording in 1998, December 18, 1998, we finished the recording and I went straight to Senegal with Ernest Ranglin, Papa Ranglin, the guitar player, to do a record with him and Baba Mal for Island Records. What at the time it was called Palm Pictures Records, and I got introduced to Sabah drumming in Senegal, which is amazing drumming. And I came back from that trip and I told my dear friend, the percussionist, I said, "Man, I love you dearly, but I have to have this sound in the band." And that's how we got Sabah and talking drum and djembe in the band.
When did you do your first recording?
This first recording, 21st Century is the name of the first CD with the band, was recorded in 1998. It came out in 1999 on a label called Tom Records, which was a label that Ron Blake and I created together. Tom and the Fruit, that was the name of our record label, yes.
Were you always an independent, or were you ever signed with a
We've always been independent. We have 6 CDs out, and it's always been independent. And we've have some great distribution through Magnetic Air and other distribution streams. We had stuff on CD Baby, Amazon, and stuff like that. But we've always been independent as far as our recording. When we first started this project, there was a number of folks that kind of was like, "Hey, man, Caribbean jazz, we're not sure if that's going to work." And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, there's a number of bands out there. And if you look at the history of Latin jazz was created back in the 40s with Shana Pozo and Dizzy Gillespie, and it worked. And it's still a major genre today. So why can't the rest of the Caribbean be part of that?
Desi Arnaz?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I
Exactly.
mean, yeah, yeah. That was big stuff. You talked about Senegal. Let me try and pull some of this together. Um, you mentioned the diaspora. You have Jazz Caribbean, and you mentioned Senegal. Why don't you explain more about the Caribbean music culture and its relationship to Africa?
Well, it all came from Africa. Again, every island has its own sound and its own flavor of rhythms, but a lot of them are the same. I mean, if you could call what you call sango in Cuba, the pattern 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4. It's a calypso pattern in St. Thomas. It's a calypso pattern in St. Thomas. If you if you take it back to Africa, that is a 6/8 pattern. Ting ting taka 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 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2 3 4 5 6 1 2. It's the same pattern, just metrically divided differently, and each island has its own flair of how they present it, and they call it a different thing. But that's the diaspora, but it all connects back to Africa. When I went to Africa, I remember the guys took me out after we came out of the studio one night, and we went to this club, and we're sitting there, having some food, and there's a live band playing, and these guys started playing the clave, and I felt like I was in Cuba. I've been to Cuba before. Like they were, and they were like clavering it up and all of the rhythms, but it was all these African drums and the singing. And I looked at my friend and I was like, man, that's Cuban music. He said, no, it's African music. This ended up in Cuba. Yeah. And that's when I really started to pay attention rhythmically to what was happening, and the rhythms of the diaspora coming from Cuba to South America up to the Caribbean, what ended up in New Orleans and then spread through the rest of the world. And New Orleans was very important for the creation of jazz because of the European influence and the theory and the melodic stuff and all of the classical stuff that was happening. I mean, back in the day, New Orleans had over 100 opera houses. That's amazing. But what came through the Caribbean was different rhythmic components from different tribes in Africa, and they settled on different islands. But they all had that basic, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4. They all had that basic, in Puerto Rico, they call it bomba plena. It's a different name on every island and it's presented differently, but it's the same rhythm. And that's the thing that really fascinated me, throughout this whole connection of the diaspora coming from Africa all the way to the US, how that one rhythm was translated and became a sound.
Yeah, you and I had talked before the show. We had a chance to talk with each other, and one of the things became very interested in was the spread of food from Africa. It's so much of American food, which we have no clue, but it came from Africa. And a lot of the food, Ratatouille, a lot of the food that's in New Orleans came straight out of Africa. And,
spices.
That's what Southern food is.
Yeah.
And Southerners don't even know the origins of their own food, but it came from Africa.
Yeah, history and research is really something that I think if folks start to personally pay attention to just researching things, they would understand stuff better. We wouldn't make some of the mistakes over and over and over again. Every generation repeats themselves and have to fight for the same thing, and it's very clear where we came from. If you just make that trip, going to Africa just opened up my eyes, and then traveling to Europe, you see things. I mean, I remember being in Istanbul, going to the spice market, and understanding, like you talking about food, like you stand in the middle of the spice market and have every spice in the world. And years ago, that same market was the epicenter of our economics. They were trading spice as currency.
Spice trade, yeah.
It's the spice trade, exactly. And if you actually pay attention to your history and learn it, you could understand how we got to where we got to, and try to be a better human being in creating a path for the next generation. There's a poem I learned, coming up called Bridge Builder. And the purpose of building a bridge was not for me to get across the bridge. I'm going to get across the bridge once I build a bridge. But the point is to build a bridge for that kid coming behind me that need to travel the path and take it further than what I did. And if you have the mentality, then you could be a better contributor to the music, to society, to this world. And that's what I believe in.
One of the things I wanted to try to connect during this conversation, and then we'll play another one of your songs in a minute. I wanted to connect Jazzribian, you're going to be doing a show on Source Radio Network, and it's called Sounds of the Diaspora, and it's
Yes.
artist to artist. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about the show and how that is going to relate to the Jazz Caribbean music?
Well, we're in the discussion process of creating the show, but Sounds of the Diaspora conversation with Dion Parson is an artist to artist conversation, and just like we're talking about, how did we get here as an artist? Everybody has their journey, and everyone has a goal or objective in life, and we all have a path. And Sounds of the Diaspora is about talking to musicians about, or not only musicians, about creative folks, whether they're chef or author or painter. How did they get to their, how did they, how did they move along their path and got to where they got to? And that's what Sounds of the Diaspora is. And that's kind of what I've been sharing with you. When I went to Africa, so many light bulbs went off. Like, wow, this world isn't as foreign as people make it out to be.
Yeah.
Is the motherland of a lot of what I believe in, what I do as a musician, as a drummer. It explains so many questions that I had that my teacher couldn't answer, because coming from an academia standpoint, everything is about this is the way we do it, and this is versus the origins of things. And when you're dealing with organic music and organic creativity, there's a higher being, and I think that's what we're going to present in Sounds of the Diaspora, a conversation with Dion Parson. So that's something that we can look forward to as we move forward. And I'm counting on you, Mel, to be out with this.
Yeah, Deanna, and this is, you're saying something I want to just put into a different framework. It's not the destination; it's the trip.
It's the journey. Yep.
It's the journey. How did you get there? The destination is a given,
yeah.
but how did you get there? And everybody's got a different path.
Everybody
to get to the same place.
Yes.
But it's what they bring along from that trip,
right,
that keeps everything alive and fresh and innovative and interesting. And,
exactly.
So I always maintain, it's not where you are, it's how you got there that really is a story.
Yeah, that's the story and that's what I get when I talk to folks. Some folks have more to say, and it's a deeper story, and some folks have less to say. Some folks are planted there and say, hey, you be the next person and go ahead and make it happen. And other people had to fight for that. And other people were denied it and never got to the true accolades that they could get to, but they never stopped. And so everybody have a story, and I believe we're all put here on this planet for a reason, and that story is worth telling. So that's what Sounds of the Diaspora is the foundation of it is going to be about.
This is why I wanted to get the backstory on you. For somebody in the West Indies end up at Rutgers, I mean, how would you make that connection? And I think that that's such an important part of who you are and who you became. And it happened serendipitously because these guys from Rutgers came down and played.
Yeah. But and then the interesting thing is, it happened at the University of the Virgin Islands. Back then, it was called the College of the Virgin Islands. And here I am, years later. Went to Rutgers, have 2 degrees, lived in New York for 30 years, have a wonderful career, and here I am back at the university as the chair of the Communication and Performing Arts Department, taking it to the next level and being a contributing factor. So I truly believe in giving back. I am a big component of giving back, because I didn't get here by myself. Like I said, my journey, when I left for college, I had 1 suitcase, $3,000, and like 4 pairs of drumsticks. That's all I owned. And I went to college, and that's all I had. And it really I look back and say, wow, there was some rough days back there, but those are the days that made me get up the next day and say, hey man, tomorrow's going to be better. Tomorrow's going to be better. And
Dion, you're talking about something that's so important to me, mentoring.
yes.
I had wonderful people who mentored me through graduate school, and who I am would never be if it wasn't for them.
Yes.
And and those experiences are so priceless, and the shortcuts they give you into giving you insight that would take you years to get elsewhere. And
right.
and that's why we were talking earlier about the classic jazz players, they pass this along, and suddenly it's like a drop off the cliff, and the younger jazz players aren't connected that way, and they're missing something extraordinary.
They are missing something extraordinary. I mean, is nothing wrong with having the information.
No,
It's I still study. I believe I got to New York. I studied. I got to New York, and I was running around. I was playing with everybody, and I was trying to like connect the dots on all of these things. And I was on a plane going to Japan to perform at the Blue Note with Jerry Allen and master drummer, my mentor Michael Carver was on the same plane. And I met him on that plane, and we talked the whole flight. 15 hours. Sat next to each other, talked the whole flight. Landed in Japan. He went his way. I went my way. Got back to New York, and then about 4 months later, I ran into him in a drum shop again. And he's
wow,
like, "Yeah, man, did you think about what we talked about?" And I said, "Yeah." And he told me some things about myself I never thought about. And
there you go, there you
and
go.
I became his student, like on the spot, and I studied with him for 14 years straight, and
Wow,
it's mentoring is important.
yeah,
Mentoring apprenticeship is something that I think is
yeah,
very, very
I agree.
important, and a lot of youngsters don't believe in that. They don't want anybody to, you don't have to tell me what to do. I know what to do, and yeah, we're all gonna have that attitude at some point, but the information that you get, if you're humble enough to take in that information and wise enough to pay attention to the people that have done it before you, then you can actually craft your path better. Because when I left St. Thomas, put it this way, I was so misinformed. It was November. It was November. I was in college. I was wearing like 5 sweaters. All I had was a members only jacket, and I was walking around like this. And my friends was wearing thick down coats with hoodies and everything. And a professor of mine, a gentleman by the name of Noel DeCosta, violin instrumentalist and composer. He was Jamaican, and he pulled me aside one day. He said, "Young man, what is going on with you? What's wrong with you, man? Why can't you get it together?" I said, "Man, I'm trying, man, but I'm cold. I don't know what to do." He said, "Tomorrow, meet me back here at 9 o'clock in the morning." So next morning, I met him there. He came with a village voice. He circled H&M. He's like, "You need to go to this store. Here's the direction. Here's a ticket. Go to New York. It's at 99.99. It was for this down jacket. It was thick.
Yeah,
And I dropped everything, went to the bank, took out $100, crisp $100 bill, jumped on the train, told me I got to New York. He told me which subway to take. I took it, got off, walked to the store, I put the advertisement, the clip on the counter. I told the lady, I need this coat right away. She looked at me, she's like, "Come with me." And I put on the down coat. I was like, "Oh man, this is
I,
so warm."
I'm
This is
I'm gonna tell you a story just like that. When I was a director of the MBA program at the University of Maryland, and I hired somebody who came from Neves and had been living in Maryland, and he
Mhm.
told me the story that when his parents first took him to New York, he was 8 years old, and when he was on the plane, about to get off in New York, it was winter, and his mother said, "Put on this coat." And he put this coat on, and he went out of the plane and outside, and he started taking the coat off. And his mother said, "Why are you taking the coat off?" He said, "The coat's making me cold." He'd never been in cold weather. He thought it was the coat.
Yeah. Wow. Well. So just there's one more little section to my story. So I put on this coat, and I'm so warm. I'm like, "Oh man, this is great." And I'm standing at the counter, and the lady's like, she rang it up. She's like, "Okay, that'll be $118." And I was like, 180. I said,
Oh,
"Miss,
you
it
got
says
100.
99.99." And she said, "Yeah, but taxes, me coming from the islands, we don't have
Yeah,
taxes." I was
yeah.
I was so misinformed. And I looked at her, I said, "Miss, this is all I have, and a token to get back on the train and a train thing back to college." And she looked at me and she was like, "You're serious?" I said, "I'll mop the floors, I'll do whatever you need me to do. I'm not taking this coat off." And she went in the back and she came out and she paid the rest of it. She was from the islands also, and she said, "Young man, I know what you're going through. Don't worry about it." And so, because of that, nobody, I've never left the islands before. I've been away, but
Yeah,
not that extreme weather. And so, these again, part of your journey. These are the things that I learned. So, informing my foundation at home, these are the things that I share with my kids. You're getting ready to go to college. You got to prepare, you got to be prepared for the weather. You got to prepare a certain way, not only academically, but you have to be prepared, socially. You have to be prepared physically, emotionally. And that's the things that we share, because like when I went to college, I didn't even know I had to audition. Nobody told me there was an audition piece. I just showed up and said, I'm here. And everybody was laughing at me. I did not know. And it's funny because like the cards didn't say I was going to be in this position 40 years later, but I'm a quick learner, and I was very determined to pursue my dream. And so it was a lot of hard lessons along the way,
Yeah.
but
Dion, things were so different back then.
they were.
When I was gonna go to college, I had a list of colleges, and I had this teacher who I was very close with in high school. It was just like a mentor, and I was asking him about these different colleges, and he said, "Do you want to know how you pick the right college?" I said, "How?" He said, "Go to the library, and if there's nobody in there, you don't want to go there." he said he said if the people in the library, it means it's a learning environment and people want to learn. If there's nobody in the
Right,
library, what's the point of going?
right,
you
exactly.
know and
Yeah.
so people will give you these insights that
Hmm.
you would never think about. And it's the same
Exactly.
thing on your journey. Getting a coat and having somebody saying, "I'll take care of the rest of the $18 for you."
Yeah, I had never been through the change of seasons. In the Virgin Islands, we don't change seasons. Everything is warm and beautiful all year. The only thing we have to look out for is hurricanes.
Yeah,
Outside of that,
yeah,
it's 80 degrees
yeah,
every day. So
yeah.
yeah, that was, and I was totally unaware. I was
Let,
totally unaware.
let's play another one of your great songs. Which one should I play now? Calypso Bayou or A Day in One Piece?
Let's do Air and the G Strings. This is a song that I shared with Carlton Holmes, our piano player. It's a song by Johann Sebastian Bach, a traditional, one of his great pieces, and you hear it everywhere. But I heard this rhythm. It reminded me of a yacht style like Bob Marley, and we decided to put kind of Bob Marley and the Wailers on top of or underneath this melody, and come up with this arrangement of Air and a G string by Johann Sebastian Bach.
Well, I think Bach would have approved. So let me play it for everybody. It's a great song. have to. I'm just waiting for the wind down. I have to make two quick comments on this. First of all, what's the beauty of jazz in this piece is the complexity of the instrumentation. Do you do all the charting and scoring, and do you do the mixing on these tracks?
It varies. Like for instance, this song, uh, I actually woke up in the middle of the night, like 2 in the morning, and I heard this arrangement in my head, and I picked up the phone and I called Carlton Holmes, the piano player, and he picked up the phone. I didn't think he was going to pick up the phone. I was like, air on a G string, and Carlton studied classical music at Manhattan School of Music, and he was like, you know, air on a G string. He's like, okay, and I was like, and this is what I'm hearing, and I'm hearing this section here, and I'm hearing this, and I started to sing it on the phone to him. And about 2 months later, I wasn't St. Thomas. About 2 months later, I ended up in New York, and we were rehearsing for a performance. And he brought the chart in, and this is what it sounded like. And we were playing it, and like the whole band looked around. And I was like, "Wow, this is amazing!" And we
It is.
made a couple adjustments, but he orchestrated what I was hearing, and added his own thing on top of it. So
Yeah, when I
yeah.
hear it, I don't hear jazz and reggae on Bach. I hear Bach on jazz and reggae. The A string comes through so clearly that it's
Mm,
Bach's piece, but it's
yeah.
so interesting in its texture, the way it's been integrated, in jazz. It's a beautiful piece, So I
You.
love it.
Yeah, yeah. It's really it's a pleasure to be able to do this and work with the members of the band. And I arrange a lot of different things and a lot of different styles collectively. But yeah, I give the credit to this to Carlton because he was able to take what I was hearing and put it all together. And the band, I mean, collectively, everybody just this is just one of many pieces like that we have. Yeah.
It's wonderful. Look, I know you have to get up early in the morning. I don't want to keep you much longer, but can you tell everybody about your about your foundation, and then we'll close out with your last song. So tell us
Oh
about.
yes,
Yeah.
United Jazz Foundation .org. You can Facebook us. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We have our website. The foundation is based in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. Well, in the entire Virgin Islands, we service all three islands, and we serve underprivileged children, mainly in music, and we work with the Department of Education of United States Virgin Islands and with the governor's office to do specific programs for these young kids. And I must say, we've been working in the Virgin Islands. This is our 11th year now, and we've had a really good success rate with our kids. Not all of our students that participate in our program go into music, but 99% of them go into college, and all of
Wow,
them get a scholarship in college. Every
that's
kid get a
terrific.
scholarship in college. 80% of the kids get full scholarships into college.
Wow.
And not all of them go into music, but they all get scholarship, and 80% of them get full scholarships into college. And they have to audition to get into our program, first of all. So they have to have some level of foundation. And we do a lot of theory. We teach them improvisation. We have mentors coming. They all have to take private lessons. We prepare them for their auditions into college, things that the stuff I didn't know. We make sure they have a winter coat. We get them instruments. I'm a Ludwig drum in Dorsey, and Ludwig drum is a partner company of Conselma. So we partner with Conselma to get instrument, and we have benefactors in the community that pay for instruments for the kids to make sure when the kids graduate and they're going into college, the ones
Excuse me, but about how many kids go through the program at once?
Oh man, it varies. We have up to 70 kids some years.
Wow,
Right
that's a
now, we
lot.
have two groups. We have 18 kids. We have two groups. More. This is the first time we took beginners because we were coming off of COVID, and we wanted to. There was a lot of kids that showed up that didn't have the skill set because they were stuck at home for 2.5 years, so they missed a lot of things. So we took in beginners this year and mentoring them. But our main group is a group of 9 kids, and we're building back, but we had up to 70 kids at one point.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's terrific. Well, I think, look, you're doing great work with the foundation. It's wonderful, and you're giving back. That's what you were talking about earlier, and it's wonderful that there's people like you that are stepping up and trading guns for instruments with kids.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm glad you said that, trading gun for instruments, because I just want to give a special shout out to my wife Nicole for being there for me, and my foundation, of course, but also to all of my hyperdrive brothers that are working on a number of different community projects around the U.S. and partner with me in the Caribbean, trading guns for instruments and setting up different programs for the kids. So I just want to say kudos to all my hyperdrive brothers out there doing wonderful things to serve their community and help bring positiveness into everybody's lives. And thank you, Mel, for having me and your team. This has been a joy sitting there and talking with you.
I enjoyed it immensely. I can go on all night, but I know you have other things to do. So let's close out, playing Calypso Bayou. Why don't you give a little brief story about that, and we'll close out with your song.
Well, like I mentioned, I was working with Donald Harrison, the great Donald Harrison in New Orleans, and they have Second Line and Mardi Gras and all of that, and we have Carnival in St. Thomas also is a different vibe. But this melody came to me, and I wanted to pay homage to all of the wonderful experiences and times I had in New Orleans. So I wrote this song called Calypso Bayou as my homage to New Orleans and the wonderful music of their diaspora as well.
Wonderful. So let's play it now, and then we'll say goodnight.
Okay.
Briefly afterwards. You did it. You took me back to the Cafe Du Monde with chicory coffee and beignets.
Thank you, Mel. There's a calypso vibe, but it has a New Orleans twist on it.
It definitely does. It
Yes,
definitely does. It's
yeah,
wonderful.
great.
Dion, I want to thank you for the wonderful music and for the time you spent with us. I know you're on vacation, and I really appreciate you taking time out to be on the show. And for all the 57,911 people out there who've been tuning in to hear you, I want to say to everybody good night, and I want to thank you once again, Dion.
You're more than welcome, Mel. Thank you for having me, and thank you to all of the listeners out there, and thank you for all the support. And look forward to catching up with you, Mel.
Well, we're looking forward to your show. I'm looking forward to it too.
Yes, sir.
So,
All right.
so you have a wonderful, safe trip back. Okay.